Everybody, it's Coach Hughes here with yet another Be Best You podcast. As you guys all know, in order to lead others, you need to be the best version of yourself. And whether you're a coach, whether you're a teacher, and in this case, you can see I'm wearing my Jersey Mike's logo. So I just happen to be in a class this week right now talking about leadership and talking about employees and how in our business we wear a blue apron, and the blue apron is the most important decision that you make every day. And a lot of our decision makers aren't either educated or trained or confident on how to make that decision. And what I have on today is I have a gentleman by the name of Joe Mull. Joe, welcome. It's a long
John.
go there. We have don't have too much time, but how I came across you, there's several other speakers and authors, friends of yours that I happen to be friendly with as well. And Jason Hewlett was the first one who started promoting your book maybe a month or so,
Right.
or longer. And as soon as I saw the title, and the title of Joe's book is called Employalty, brilliant, by the way, it immediately caught my attention and reached out to Joe and his team, and they were kind enough to be able to come on and talk a little bit about the book. And that's really what I want to do, is less about me and more about what you've learned in your research and study. But first of all, congratulations on the book. It's awesome. Love it.
Thank you so much, man. I really appreciate the chance to be with you today. And you know, I've done a lot of these podcast interviews, but you have had so much enthusiasm around the book, around what the book is trying to do in the world. You know, not everybody reads the book. You've read the book, you've shared it with others. So really, it's a pleasure to be with you, man.
Yeah, you know, and I've been fortunate enough, been lucky enough, blessed, I guess, you can say, to be able to be part of a company from day one. It started as Mike's, and then I've been with it. It'll be 40 years in May. And then having the opportunity to get to train people on how to be successful in the business, and while I was learning it on my own, really. And while learning on your own is still the best way to do it, there wasn't a lot of places to go and get research on how to lead people, the right people. And I never wanted to be a manager. I always wanted to be a leader. And what I love about your book too is you actually speak to the generations of how the workforce has changed over time. You did a lot of research on, you know, the industrial time, the kind of that corner manager, the boss kind of time, how things have changed, and how a lot of companies maybe not have adapted to that, to the new way of doing business, you know?
Right.
I think the stigma out there is that employees are lazy, which I don't think they are, that they're entitled, they feel like they should have that right job out there. While things have changed, I don't think that's fair. And a lot of the stuff that you found through your research kind of validates that, but also helps people transition from that old mindset to kind of the new mindset. That's a big thing out of the book that I got. Can you speak on that a little bit about some of the research and what you found about how business is done, or how employees go about wanting to stay with you, as opposed to having to stay with you over years?
Yeah. You know, and your point about how overwhelming it can be to think about all the things we have to do as leaders in order to be effective in that role was really the genesis of this book. I had been doing leadership development work and management training for 20 years and realized that every time you try to have a conversation about what are the things a leader needs to do to lead teams well, or what are the things that we have to get right in order to get people at work to care and try and give it all they've got, we would have to make this massive list of all the things that we have to pay attention to, right? And I realized that, you know, no wonder it's so hard to create the conditions at work for people to thrive. It feels like, as business owners or as leaders or even frontline managers, that we need to memorize a doctoral dissertation's amount of research to understand the things we should pay attention to. And so I really set out to create a one-sentence answer to the question, where does commitment come from at work? And when you factor in what's been happening in our economy and what's been happening at work over the last 40 years, especially here in the US, What we know right now is that we are going through a reckoning of around how work fits into people's lives, because people have been overworked and burned out and in a lot of cases underpaid for so long. And so the choices people are making about work right now are really being driven by quality of life. And so, as you encountered in the book, Coach, the whole framework of the message is that there are three areas of the employee experience you have to get right if you want people to join and stay and be committed. And we call those three areas ideal job, meaningful work, and great boss. And then we write at length about what is involved in each of those areas.
Now, you do speak to a lot of the research that's being done by great companies, Glassdoor or Gallup, you know, and across all your research, did you obviously you did because you came to a consensus, but were you seeing some patterns in all the different research out there validating what you were saying?
Absolutely. So think about somebody that you know who has changed jobs in the last couple of years, and think about the reason that they gave for switching. Now, I will do this a lot in workshops, or if I'm keynoting at a conference, I will ask the audience, how many of you know somebody who has changed jobs? And nearly every hand goes up. And then I'll ask, why are people switching? And what you get back is 24 different answers, right? People will say money. People will say they want to be able to work from home, toxic workplace, a better boss, better benefits, work-life balance. We'll rattle off 24 answers in about a minute for all the reasons that people are switching. And they all sound different, but the truth is they all roll up to a bigger idea. And that bigger idea is quality of life.
Mm.
That I have endured as a worker, for a lot of us, a time period where work started to bleed into every corner of my life. At the same time, our lives outside of work have grown increasingly complex too, right? So
Right.
many of us are, for example, a primary caregiver to an elderly parent. And so we're constantly trying to juggle the demands of work and life at the same time. And as work has become more rigorous and more demanding, it hasn't accounted for the changes in the complexity outside of work as well. And so across that research, when you look at the reasons people take a job or decide to leave an organization or decide to stay, what they tell us consistently is, I want that job to fit into my life in an ideal way. And that's really about my compensation, my workload, and having some flexibility. I want my work to be meaningful, which really comes down to, I want my work to have purpose. I want it to align with my strengths, and I want to experience belonging on a team and in the organization. And I need to work for a great boss. We know the research is clear that a person's direct supervisor is the single most influential factor in the employee experience. And
Yeah.
you know, there are a ton of things that leaders have to get right for someone to point to them and say, man, I've got a great boss. But we think the most important are trust and coaching and advocacy. That's
Mhm.
what the research across so many different areas of employee engagement and workforce development and human resources are telling us in this post-COVID world.
Yeah, it's interesting because you look at how management and operations, maybe if we use those two different
Mhm.
parts of the same team, we'll look at a profit and loss. And I've always found it interesting that management, say an owner, and it's not wrong, will look at a P&L, go right to the bottom line, and
Mhm.
then go to the top line and then go, someone's in trouble, right? Meaning,
Mhm.
someone didn't do something right. And let's say labor is too high. A
Mhm.
manager or an operations person lots of times doesn't get to see the P&L. But if they do, which is rare at all at best, they'll look at, am I going to get killed or not? Never seeing the
Mhm.
bottom line. And
Yep.
I've always found it interesting that in business, we have two people trying to accomplish the same goal, looking at the same piece of paper in
Yeah.
the in the opposite direction, really. And today, for example, we were talking about how to make more money, in the business, and everybody, make more sales and get new customers and do this. I said, yeah, but you can also make as much money or more by keeping the customers you have already,
Mhm.
and you can also make more money by keeping the employees that you have. I mean, imagine how much money you could make if you never lost a customer or if
Yep.
you never lost an employee. To that point, are you seeing an easing in companies being more comfortable in investing in the employee part of this equation rather than
Mm.
managing that? Or I'll just give you one example. A lot of times in our industry, somebody will get uniform shirts. If they work part-time, they'll get one. If they, maybe they'll get two. And then they'll have to
Yeah.
sign on, not our company, but a lot of companies and people I deal with. And then they'll have to sign a sheet saying if you leave or you get fired, you have to give the shirt back or we'll take $7 out of your paycheck.
Yeah.
Like now, two shirts isn't enough for a lot of employees. So
Mhm.
what does that cost? $15. But people will say, well, three shirts versus two shirts. I'm like, do you know how much it costs to lose an employee
Yep.
and in turnover? And it just seems to be counterintuitive, but that seems to be the common practice out there of controlling labor. Um, and but I want to take care of my employees, but only if it doesn't cost me a lot of money.
Yeah. Yeah. When we wrote the book and we decided to title it Employalty, we're sort of playing a little bit of a trick on the reader, right?
Love
You
it.
see that word and you think it means employee loyalty, but employalty actually means employer loyalty and humanity. Across all the work we've done, we consistently see that when an employer makes a commitment to a more humane employee experience, they actually get more commitment from that employee. And what we mean by a more humane employee experience at its foundation really is that we're not treating that person like a commodity. And if you think about an organization that does millions of dollars a year in revenue, who then goes to an employee and wants to haggle over a $7 shirt, at least from the employee's seat, that feels like the commoditization of me. It feels like you're squeezing dollars out of me. And I think to your point earlier about, two people looking at the profit and loss sheet in different ways, the only way that those folks can work well together and understand each other is if they're able to see each other's challenges through their sets of eyes. And so that frontline manager that you talked about really understands the hidden cost of turnover, really understands the hidden cost of having to spend hours a week on performance management issues because they've not been able to terminate a toxic employee. Those are numbers that don't show up on the P&L. Conversely, to your point, are we seeing organizations invest more in employee experience? Absolutely, in part because they have to. There's this kind of push and pull between it right now. There are some organizations who have looked around and said, we are struggling to fill positions, or we can't keep people. People will join our organization and then they leave. We are a departure organization. And so they look around and they say, what do we need to do differently? And they start adapting to the environment. And maybe that's about pay. Maybe that's about schedule. Maybe it's about workload. Maybe it's about culture. Maybe it's about leadership. But there are a whole host of circumstances and experiences to evaluate. On the other hand, though, on the other side are a handful of businesses who say, you know what? It's true that people generally do a great job when they believe they have a great job. So how do we make this place the very best place to be a blank, right? To be a plumber, to be a waiter, to whatever the job is. How do I make this place so phenomenal that you would never want to leave and go anywhere else? And I think the biggest difference there, John, is when you're adapting to your circumstances and you're doing it because you have to, I don't know that you ever fully commit to that more humane employee experience. When organizations commit to a set of conditions that are necessary to preserve the humanity of people, things like belonging, things like adequate compensation, things like a manageable workload, a great boss, you have to decide that the absence of those things is inhumane. And once leadership decides that the absence of an ideal job doing meaningful work for a great boss is inhumane, that's actually where the real transformation occurs. And we're seeing that in more and more organizations.
Yeah, I love it because you're right. I mean, in loyalty, if you read the book, you would think a lot of people, oh man, how do I make my employees be more loyal to my job and
Right.
more loyal to, and what it is it's, I mean, of course, there's an element to that, but I like the fact that you're saying employalty, meaning in order to get people to want to work for you, and I love talking about this, rather than have to work for you. And that's kind of the
Mm-hmm.
secret. What you're creating is a loyalty to the brand, to the job, to the responsibility, the agreement that you made with each other.
Mm-hmm. You
One
have
of the
to
things
commit to
that,
being a great place to work for them in order for
yeah,
them to commit to you. You can't
right.
expect it first the other way around.
Yeah, it's, one of the questions I asked years ago was, for our brand, why would you work at this particular brand? Or why would you eat this particular product? Why would you even buy into this brand? And there's people that you can, and then the question I would ask them is, well, why would someone work for you? And it's not,
Mm-hmm.
and don't, the answer can't be, well, because I'm going to treat people the way I would want to be treated. You're not allowed to answer that. And you can see people really
Yeah.
struggle. And you said something there where I agree, and it's important that people hear is how do you become the employer of choice in your 2-3 mile radius of your location or
Yeah.
your business?
Yeah.
Because employees today are choosing to work at places, and money, as you've found and you put it in multiple times in your research here, isn't the number one draw.
Hmm.
The
Hmm.
other thing I really loved was where you kind of quantified a little bit where through COVID, the term is quitting culture, right? The quitting
Hmm.
culture. And
Hmm.
you found that people weren't quitting, they weren't quitting working.
Hmm.
They were quitting one place to go work
Yes.
someplace else. Going
Yes.
back to that quality of life, can you put a little research to, or not research, some
Yeah.
little facts behind that I thought was very clever.
There are a couple of myths that are continuing to persist about what's going on. If you keep hearing these terms like the great resignation and quiet quitting and things like that, we're walking around with this perception that this started after COVID, and it really didn't. We know that here in the US, for example, after the Great Recession in 2008, in 2009, 2 million more people voluntarily left their positions than had the year before. And then in 2010, it happened again. And then in 2011, it happened again. And every year in the US, like clockwork, since 2009, the number of people who have voluntarily left a position has increased. And at the end of last year, at the end of 2022, it was over 50 million Americans. This number was at an all-time high as tracked by the US Department of Labor. But would it surprise you to learn that during that exact same time period, there was 50% more hiring? In fact, across every single industry category in the US, there's been more hiring than quitting over the last 13, 14 years. And
Mm.
so when you look into the data, what becomes clear is that people aren't quitting, they're switching. And more specifically, they're upgrading. They're upgrading their quality of life, looking for all of those enhancements. Because during that same time period, John, we know that folks were more burned out than ever before, reported more stress at work than ever before, had almost no wage growth over the past 30 years in the United States, and took fewer and fewer vacation days than the generation before them. People have had enough. People are tired and they're looking for better quality of life. And so this message that persists that, boy, no one wants to work anymore. In the book, we call that the myth of lazy. Unemployment in the US is at record levels. There have only a few months in the last 50 years where it's lower than it is right now. There is no invisible mass of people who have decided to sit this one out. There simply aren't enough people to do all the jobs that we've added to our economy. And so the mindset shift that is required is that there's no staffing shortage. There's a great job shortage. And if
Yeah.
you want to more easily find and keep devoted employees, you have to choose the identity. You have to choose to be the upgrade and become what we call a destination workplace.
Yeah, I love it. Jim Sullivan, I got to interview him, and he said we don't have a labor problem; we have a leadership problem. And we
Yeah.
went into talk about what you just talked about, and that's how, again, there are people out there to work. There's more places to work, and they're being choosier. They're choosing,
Hmm.
they're taking their time to decide where they want to go. They're dipping their toe in a little bit. They're not to
Yeah.
making commitment. And I think, today we have to recognize that that's part of the process. The onboarding problem, the total commitment to that job is going to take a little bit longer. But another thing that I did see in there and to quantify, because I had really loved Gallup's research, had shown that rather than come up with, say, a boilerplate employment program, say for your leaders of your stores or your
Hmm.
leaders, your managers, you get a salary, you get an incentive in your labor, you get incentive in your sales, and then guys are chasing the bonus, and
Hmm.
they're working 60, 70 hours a week, and they're starting to realize that this isn't worth it. And that was the way we did it in the past. And Gallup was saying, rather than, when you're talking to, say, a single parent, not just a single mom, but there's single dads out there, rather than
Hmm.
pay that manager a salary and then have them chase a carrot and have somebody else raise their child, find out what they need, give them a higher salary, don't have them chase the bonus.
Yeah.
Um, or, again, did you find a lot of, what are different ways other than the conventional ways of just offering a pay package out there?
Yeah.
What are some creative ways you can do that, paying attention to your employees?
Well, you just hit on a big part of this, which is to what degree am I going to be pressured or expected to overwork. Right. Am I going to have to crack my laptop at night in order to answer emails and stay caught up on reports just to keep my head above water? Am I going to have to miss family events and gatherings? What is the amount of work that one person is reasonably expected to carry and execute day in, day out? And we know there's a kind of sweet spot. We know research tells us consistently that you want people working most of the time at about 80% of their capacity. Because when you leave a little bit of time and space, they engage in those meaningful conversations with each other at work. They build camaraderie. They develop their skills. They engage in professional development. They solve problems that they spot that maybe other people don't see. And then when something happens and you need them to ramp up to 100% temporarily to get through it, they have a little bit more, another gear to give for a short time because you haven't been pressing on them or mandating 100% all of the time. And we know also that across the board, when employees have the opportunity to have a little bit of flexibility, flexibility is the number one most requested workplace benefit in the world right now. We know it gives them some more autonomy, some more choice, some more influence over when, where, and how they work. We know this actually supercharges loyalty and commitment. The problem is that our national conversation around flexibility at work right now has zeroed in on working from home. And that can be a really effective strategy, but it's only one kind of flexibility. Flexibility might involve giving people some input over when their shift begins or ends, or how long it is, or what days it occurs on, or who they work with, or the locations they work, or the duties that are assigned to them while they work, or who their boss is. And we know that in a lot of places, some kinds of flexibility are just not possible. What we know leaders need to do now is to try to innovate in whatever way they can to grant more flexibility in some manner, because it turns out when you give people just a little bit of influence over when, where, and how they work, it actually helps turn your organization into a destination workplace for them.
Yeah. Again, rather than, one of the approaches we say is if we kind of take a college approach to, say, athletics, where high school, you're always chasing the tallest guy down the hallway saying, come on the basketball team. Where in college, you're going out other places and looking, or other people are coming and looking at you. And one of the things is a lot of people will go out and try to find employees in other places. The employees that they want, they'll go someplace else. In my early years, I think everybody's done that before, but I coach against that. I say, we shouldn't have to go someplace and steal somebody else's employees. What we need to do is create an environment, a story, a desirability to get the people that we want to be interested in us. So one of the things, I'll just give you an example. You said it is in developing the whole person, investing in the employee on a personal level. And there's this school of thought that, you don't do that. You don't get involved in their personal life. And of course, there's areas you don't. But I'll use personal finance as an example. And we just kind of partnered with Dave Ramsey's organization. And, we're not partners with them, but we have a discounted rate for people to use their Smart Dollar program. And what that's been able to do for some of our business owners is, an employee comes in, they have the option to be part of that, where they can learn how to become better, more financially independent or successful. You didn't think about that. That wasn't even on the radar 25 years ago today, where, wait, I'm going to provide financial advice to an employee. That's none of my business. But we're finding employees are really finding a lot of benefit in that. Are you finding some other things that some small businesses can do to, you're saying, how do you become the employer of choice or the desired employer in your community? What are some things that maybe an owner can do to not just pay people more money?
Right. Well, I think the first part of that begins with really working to hear from employees what would enhance their quality of life at work. And one of the reasons we wrote this book is because this is the piece of advice we've been giving for a long time, right? If you want to know what employees want to make them happy, ask. But employees don't always know or understand or necessarily have the vocabulary to articulate what it is that they're missing or that would enhance their employment experience. And so we wrote this book in order to lay out the kind of internal psychological scorecard that nearly every employee in every job and every company on planet Earth is walking around with. And so we can rattle off, as we have a little bit here in this interview, a number of those factors around compensation, workload, flexibility, et cetera. But it's going to be incumbent upon each team leader and really every small business owner from any industry to try to start to open a dialogue with people about, hey, if you could change one thing about how we do things around here, what would it be? If you could change something about your work situation, what would it be?
Yeah.
And yeah, you're going to get some people who ask for more money, but you may also get some people who ask for more time to go to conferences and get engaged in professional development. Maybe you ask for a path to leadership, right? Maybe somebody who wants to move into management but doesn't know how. You can have those conversations at an organizational level with surveys and focus groups and gather that insight. But as a leader, you can also have them at an individual level. At least specific to some of the other kinds of benefits that you mentioned, we know that right now family leave is huge. Paid family leave, not just for mothers, but for fathers as well, maybe even for grandparents. We know that there are additional benefits like work from home opportunities for folks that are more and more possible because it cuts down on people's commute time. That cuts down on their expenses. I'm not eating unhealthy food at local restaurants in the, at the office. I'm making my food at home and I'm eating healthier. There have been all of these sort of interesting conversations taking place around how work from home has influenced us. But I will tell you, Coach, I think one of the number one most important pieces for any business owner to look at actually is around compensation. And it's more specifically around what's called the living wage. And I know you're probably familiar with this concept. A living wage is not minimum wage. It's not market wage. A living wage is an economic calculation of what somebody needs to earn in order to avoid a substandard of living. And we know that in the US, in nearly every state, a living wage is above $17 an hour. But here's the rub. That's for a household of one. If you add a child, a living wage in the United States in most states is up over $30 an hour.
Or
And
a
if you
pet.
have somebody, what's that?
I mean, a child, obviously that's but a pet and the
Right,
implication of having a pet, to
right,
that equation. They don't even think about that. But
right.
good.
That's true.
Yeah.
No, that's okay. But if you have somebody, let's say you have a single parent and one child in a household, if that parent is earning less than $30 an hour, they will struggle to afford adequate food, clothing, shelter, transportation, healthcare, all of it.
Yeah.
And so, yes, it's not all about money for people who are changing jobs, except for the folks for whom it needs to be all about money. And so we've seen wage growth really for the first time in the US here in the past 2 years. But interestingly enough, I was just reading this morning in one of our major American newspapers about how it's slowing down. When we we are doomed to repeat the same mistakes again and again and again. Companies are looking around and saying, oh, well, hiring isn't quite as on fire as it used to be, so I'm actually going to lower my salaries. Well, you've just created a flight risk for every single person that you bring through the door at that lower rate, because
Yeah.
now somebody else can snag them, because we do have to pay for the sins of wage stagnation that have been around for a number of years. We do have a recalibration taking place around wages. And it's
Yeah.
not driven by greed, it's driven for a lot of people by survival.
Yeah. I remember, when Clint Pulver, you know him pretty well, I think, as well.
I
And,
do.
when he did his research and he talked about that, the sporting goods gentleman and how he kind of found that, as he talked to different employees at that particular place, how they were like ready to go. And then when he asked
Hmm.
the founder, he said, well, the people have changed. What have you done to change the way you deal with your people? And the guy said, I haven't. And that just
Hmm.
blew his mind. But
Yeah.
I see a less of it in my job and what I do. The last 5 or 6 years, I see less resistance to, well, this is how we used to do stuff.
Yeah.
Well, then it was, and well, if we can't do that anymore, then it's the employee's fault. But I've seen a shift to, okay, that is how we used to do stuff. Maybe it wasn't the best way. Yes, employees are have a lot more freedom. Maybe mom and dad are making lives easier for them than it was for
Hmm.
them, growing up. But I also see that people are curious about this part of the business, where before you'd go by a McDonald's and you had a 30-foot sign that says, we're paying you $20 an hour, boom.
Yeah.
And people were flocking there and going, this stinks. I don't want to do this.
Yep.
20, I'll do something else for $10 an hour and do this for $20 an hour.
That's right.
And so I do see moving in this direction of what you were finding. So what I like about your book as well is not only do you give it, you provide some research backed stats. Okay. Because lots of times, as you know, being an author in this environment, there's a lot of, what I find with a lot of books that I give out to people is there's a lot of regurgitation of the same content.
Yes. Yes.
There's a lot of people who are reading books and then writing their own book based on the other people's stuff, which is kind of the same thing.
Spot on. Yep.
What I found refreshing with yours was that it doesn't over talk. It kind of it does a nice job at providing the research and then actually letting people go learn more about that particular research. So you don't get all the research in the book. You tease us a little bit with it, and then if we want to learn more about it from Glassdoor or Gallup or whomever, you give us that option.
Thank you, John.
Yeah,
I appreciate that. I think one of the things that I enjoyed the most too about writing the book was how do you make a case that all of the complexity around what activates commitment at work, how do you boil it down into a simple framework that people can understand? And so, how do I write a chapter about compensation in the United States where there are so many forces at work, but do it in a way that still has utility for folks? And what we really tried to do is find small to mid-sized businesses because most people work for small to mid-sized businesses, or they work for entrepreneurs. And we tend to hold up massive companies in this country when we write books about leadership and employee engagement, right? You can pick up a leadership book tomorrow and you'll see stories in there about Southwest Airlines and Apple and Patagonia and all of those companies are great. But we wanted to write about hospitals, and we wanted to write about electricians, and we wanted to write about assisted living facilities, and we wanted to write about mom and pop restaurants, and to really talk about the context of winning at the employee experience in those environments, because that's where we're struggling with workforce the most.
Yeah. I went to the most recent National Speakers Conference. I know you're familiar with there. And I just went there to talk to different people and get some possible interviews lined up. And once people, I talked to Clint and a couple of the other guys, Jason was there. And it was funny.
I missed you. I was there too. We didn't get to say hello. I didn't know you were there.
I think we saw each other. I came in
okay.
But it was funny because once people, hey, what do you work for? I told them I work for, boom. They were on me like flies on what. And I get it because right now we're a hot brand and everybody wants to kind of do their, but the two things that I found interesting about this past conference was everybody's either an employee experience expert or a customer experience expert. And one of the things that I love is one of our first taglines way back in whatever was experience it. And our store, a little tiny seaside town, 1,000 square foot store, we had a tagline that said experience it. And boiling it all down, what was it that drew and kept a lot of us working for the company for so long? And it was the way we were treated by our founder, Peter Cancro.
Yep.
And then the way in turn we ended up treating our customer. And the sandwich was always the second part of the comment. The first comment was, I love going in there because you guys always make me feel whatever. And by the way, it's it. And what I always tell people, and you back it up here, is you can have a great product, but you need good people who want to make the product right to make it all work. And if they have to do it, they'll do it to not get in trouble. When they want to do it, that's where the magic happens. And people don't have to work. They want to work. And if we can create an environment where they come to work every day and it's not to produce a number.
Yep.
It's right. It's about producing, the number's a result of the other stuff, I guess, is where I was going with.
Yeah. And you hit on very much all of the pieces and parts of this employalty framework that we wrote about, right? Which is that we do need meaningful work. I do need to believe that my work matters. I do need to believe that the work I'm doing is something that I'm good at. I do want to feel like I'm a part of a team. I do want to go to work for a boss who treats me with respect and looks out for me and cares about me, not just at work, but outside of work. You know, I tell the story often as a speaker about a local small business owner in my community who constantly posts in our community Facebook group when he has openings. And he always does it the same way. He said, need to find good people. No one wants to work anymore. And then he lists the pay and the hours for his positions, and they're pretty lousy.
You
And so
see
it's
that a
been an
lot.
interesting thing to watch people in the community come back and say, hold on, time out. It's not that nobody wants to work, it's that nobody wants to work for you.
There you
And
go.
we really want this to be the story. When we have a hard time filling positions, we want to blame people.
Yep.
When the truth is, we need to fix work. And when we do that, when we turn the mirror inward on ourselves, we actually start solving the problems internally in our organizations, among our leaders, and on our teams that maybe have led to us losing people, of not being able to get people to apply or stay. When you start fixing those kinds of problems, you actually become a destination workplace. People will be drawn to you. People will be talking about the employee experience. You mentioned a few minutes ago about how hard it is to recruit. Well, when you actually win in all the right areas of the employee experience, your employees become your best recruiters, and you
Mhm.
create an extraordinary competitive advantage for yourself when you invest in those employee experiences.
Yeah, I mean, A players are looking for A players. You
That's
know,
right.
I just use a quick example. I'll ask a lot of the managers last time you went for a job, and they were offering the hours you wanted, even maybe more pay than you wanted. But when you walked in and you saw the employees that were there, you immediately walked
Mhm.
out and said, "Not worth it."
Yep.
So, yeah, I mean, having the people you want, and again, we can talk a lot about this. I'd love to be able to connect with you again sometime, but I
Sure.
know you have to do stuff. And so, a couple quick, you mentioned a few times that and I know you've had some other people and do to help you with the research.
Hmm.
How do one is order the book on
Hmm.
through Amazon, certainly you can do that, but
Hmm.
also a website. Is there any other places people can go and find more about your research and your work?
Yeah, absolutely. So thank you for that. Yeah, the book is
Yeah.
available wherever you like to get your books. You can get it on Amazon. You can go to indiebound.org if you want to source it from your local independent bookstore. We love supporting small businesses like that. The fastest way to find me is probably by going to bossbetternow.com. I host a podcast called Boss Better Now. I'm known as the Boss Better Guy because a lot of my work for the last 10 years has really been focused on leaders and teaching leaders how to be better bosses. So you can find out anything you want to know about me over at that site and keep in touch with me if you'd like. As far as when I talk about we wrote the book, I have a hard time saying I because nobody
Yeah.
ever gets to their place of success or prominence alone. And so I had a wonderful editor that I worked with and a wonderful publisher in the back end there helping us kind of bring the book to life. So it's definitely a team sport anytime you bring something like this into the world.
I'm going to be taking that in. I just always remember Alan Stein talking about something where he learned from Coach K about writing personal notes in the hotel rooms. So
Yeah.
Alan's going to listen to this, but I do that. I love what you just said right there because I think that says a lot. Where you're right. I did this. Or it's my book or my
Yeah.
site, this or that, and it's not about you. It's about
Yep.
collaboration, and you learned it from somebody. So that's
Right.
wonderful, and it says a lot about you as well. And I wish you best of luck with the book. And just so you know, what I usually will do is we buy. I have probably about 35 classes a year. It's a week long class. I'm in the middle of one right now. We
Yeah.
go to We're in Tampa at the end of the month, 150 people down there, and I have about 5 or 6 books, and I'll raffle about 5 or 6 years off. And it's
Oh,
funny
that's
to
amazing.
see where people go, and there's different books I'll bring in. But right now, this is obviously this is important. Um,
Awesome.
More than happy to share it with as many people as I can.
Well, that just makes my day, man. I love hearing that you're actually putting this into the hands of leaders who are the boots on the ground and making things go in your organization. That's beautiful. Thank you so much.
Yeah, no problem. Well, it's again, it wraps things up. I can go on and on and on. There's so much, and I think part of this podcast is not to keep anybody listening too long, but keep them, get them interested to learn more about this topic or the person on there. So please check out Joe's information, all the content. I will provide those websites as well. And we'll get this thing out there as many people as we can. And Joe, I appreciate it very much. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. It's been a pleasure.
All right. Coach Hughes here from another Be Best You podcast. Until next time.